My grandmother had a saying she used exactly once, and only when she meant it. She would look at you not with anger, not with disappointment, but with something quieter than both. And she would say, "You already know better than this." That was it. No lecture, no list of everything you had done wrong. Just that one sentence, delivered in a voice that made it impossible to argue with. "You already know better than this." I heard it from her 3 times in my life. The first time I was 9 years old and had lied about something small. The second time I was 19 and had made a choice about a boy that she could see from across a room was going to cost me. The third time I was 31, newly out of a relationship that had taken 4 years and most of my confidence with it, sitting at her kitchen table while she made tea. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say, "You should have listened to me." She said, "You already know better than this." And then she put a cup in front of me and sat down. I did not understand at 31 what she was actually telling me. I thought she was talking about that relationship, about that man. I did not understand until much later, closer to 50 than to 30, that she was talking about something larger, about the habit of ignoring what I already knew. That is what this episode is about. My grandmother's name was Miriam. She was not a woman who spoke often about relationships or love or standards. She was not the kind of grandmother who sat you down and gave you a speech. She was quiet and she was practical and she said things exactly once, and if you were paying attention, you caught them. But over the years, sitting in her kitchen, watching her move through her life, listening to what she said about the women around her and what she did not say, I collected things. Small observations, half sentences. The way she would pause when someone told her about a man who was behaving badly and then say nothing at all, which was its own kind of comment. I did not know I was collecting them at the time. I thought I was just spending time with my grandmother. It was only later, when I started recognizing her observations in my own experience, that I understood she had been teaching me something. She had been teaching me for years, and I had been learning it and then reliably ignoring it. Here is what Miriam taught me. Not in one sitting, not as a list, but pieced together over 20 years of watching her, listening to her, and eventually understanding what she had been trying to show me. She taught me that a man's behavior when nothing is at stake tells you everything. When someone is trying to impress you, they show you their best version. That is useful information, but it is not the information you need. What you need is to see how he behaves when he has already got what he wanted, when the early excitement has settled, when he is tired or under pressure, or when it would be easy to take you for granted. That is not the version he shows you in the first months. That is the version that reveals itself over time. And Miriam had no patience for women who confuse the early version with the real one. She also taught me, not in words but by example, that a man who makes you feel small is not someone to build a life with, no matter what else he offers. I watched her once refuse to continue a conversation with a man at a family gathering who had made a dismissive comment about something she said. She did not argue with him. She did not correct him. She simply turned away and spoke to someone else. I was about 12 years old, and I did not fully understand what I was watching, but I never forgot it. She taught me that loneliness inside a relationship is different from loneliness outside one and harder to recover from. She said this only once to my mother, and I was not supposed to hear it, but I did. And I held on to it for 30 years without quite understanding what it meant until I felt it myself. And she taught me, this was the one I resisted most, that when you already know something is wrong and you stay anyway, you are not being loyal or patient or loving. You are teaching yourself not to trust your own judgment. And that lesson, once learned, takes a very long time to undo. I ignored all of it. Not completely, not deliberately, but I ignored it in the way that most of us ignore wisdom that is inconvenient, by filing it away somewhere, acknowledging it quietly, and then doing the opposite anyway. I chose men who showed me their best version in the first months and a diminished version after that, and I told myself the early version was the real one. I stayed in relationships where I felt small because he offered other things: intelligence, certainty, the feeling of being chosen, and I told myself that feeling small was just my insecurity, not information. I experienced loneliness inside relationships and told myself it was normal, that everyone felt this, that I was asking for too much, and I knew better. That is the part that still sits with me. I knew better the whole time, not clearly, not loudly, but there was always a voice, quiet, consistent, unmistakable, that knew. And I had spent so many years learning not to listen to it that I had become very good at not hearing it. Miriam saw it. That is what she meant at 31, sitting at her kitchen table. She was not talking about the relationship I had just left. She was talking about the habit of overriding what I already knew. You already know better than this. You have always known. The problem is not that you don't know. The problem is that you have spent 30 years finding reasons not to act on what you know. There is a woman I know named Sylvia. She is 63 years old. Her grandmother also had things to say, a different grandmother, a different set of words, a different kitchen, but the same essential lesson. Sylvia told me about it when she was already on the other side of 2 long relationships and several years of being on her own. She said her grandmother used to say, "Watch what a man does with his time when it is entirely his own." Not what he does at work, not what he does when he is trying to impress someone. What he does when no one is watching and nothing is required of him. That is what he is made of. That is what you will be living alongside. Sylvia told me she understood this lesson intellectually from about the age of 20. And then she spent the next 35 years choosing men whose private selves were not something she could actually live with, and telling herself that those private selves could be changed or were not so important or would become less significant over time. They did not change. They were important. They became more significant, not less, as the years went on. She said, the strangest thing is that I knew. I knew from quite early on in each relationship. Not everything, you never know everything early, but I knew enough. There was always a moment, usually in the first year, where I saw something clearly and then immediately started explaining it away. And the explaining away was the problem, not the thing I saw. The explaining away, that is the habit Miriam was naming, the explaining away, the steady practice discipline of overriding what you already know. I want to talk about what it costs, because I think we underestimate it. When you spend years overriding what you know, you do not just make a series of poor decisions about relationships. You do something more corrosive than that. You teach yourself that your own perception cannot be trusted. You practice over and over the act of seeing something clearly and then deciding that what you saw was wrong. And eventually that practice becomes a habit. And the habit becomes a kind of permanent uncertainty about your own judgment. I have met women in their 50s and 60s who cannot answer a simple question, do you want this? Does this feel right to you? Without immediately second-guessing the answer. Not because they are confused people, not because they lack intelligence or experience, but because they have spent decades training themselves not to trust what they know, and that training is very effective. It works exactly as intended. You become very good at not trusting yourself. Miriam never had that problem. Not because her instincts were always right, she was wrong about things, like everyone, but because she did not practice overriding them. She saw something, she noted it, she acted on the note. She did not then spend 3 weeks constructing an argument for why what she had seen was probably not what she thought it was. She just moved accordingly, quietly, without announcement, with the particular confidence of a woman who has decided that her own perception is worth something. That is what I wanted to learn from her. And it is, I think, what she was trying to show me. Not a set of rules about men or relationships or what to accept and what not to, but a way of being with yourself, a willingness to take your own knowing seriously, to treat your own judgment as data worth consulting, rather than an obstacle to be reasoned past. I want to say something about why we do this, because I do not think it is foolishness. I do not think it is weakness. I think it is something more understandable than either of those things. When you are young and you want love, and someone is offering it, or something that looks enough like it, the cost of saying no feels enormous. The cost of trusting what you know when what you know might mean losing the person in front of you feels higher than the cost of explaining it away. So you explain it away. You tell yourself that your instincts are wrong, or overcautious, or shaped by past hurt. You tell yourself that this time is different. You tell yourself that the quiet voice of knowing is just fear, and that the brave thing is to ignore it and stay. And sometimes you are right. Sometimes what feels like knowing is just fear. Sometimes the brave thing is to stay and find out. I am not saying the voice is always correct, but I am saying that most of the women I have spoken to over the years, women who have come through long relationships that cost them something, describe a moment early on when they knew something they chose not to act on. And looking back, they would tell you that the thing they knew was right. Not always, but often enough to matter. The question is not whether you have the knowledge. Most of us have it. The question is whether you will let yourself act on it. Whether you have enough trust in your own perception to take it seriously, even when taking it seriously is inconvenient. Even when taking it seriously means making a harder choice than the one in front of you. Miriam did not have a complicated philosophy about this. She just refused to override what she knew. She watched, she waited, she drew her own conclusions. And when something told her a thing was wrong, she acted on it without much drama and without much explanation. She made it look easy. It is not easy. But watching her do it taught me what it was supposed to look like. Sylvia told me something near the end of our conversation that I have thought about many times since. She said, "I am 63 years old. I have 2 more good decades if I am lucky, and perhaps more. I am not willing to spend them overriding what I know. I have done that. I know what it produces. I would rather be alone and trust myself than be with someone and not. That is the inheritance Miriam left me. Not a lesson I learned at 20 or 30 or even 40. A lesson I am still learning to apply, and apply consistently, and apply without apology. You already know better than this." She meant it as a gentle correction. I have come to understand it as something more like a gift, a reminder that the knowledge was always there, that trusting it is not arrogance or selfishness or fear of intimacy. That trusting it is simply what it looks like to take yourself seriously. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, if you are in a relationship where a quiet voice has been telling you something for longer than you want to admit, I am not here to tell you what to do. I am not in your life. I do not know your circumstances. I do not know what you stand to lose. But I will say this, that voice is not nothing. That quiet, consistent knowing that you have been explaining away, it is not fear, and it is not insecurity, and it is not you being difficult. It is you knowing, and you have known for longer than you think. Sylvia said something else to me that I keep returning to. She said, the relationships that cost me the most were not the ones where I didn't have enough information. They were the ones where I had exactly enough information and chose to set it aside. That distinction matters because we tell ourselves the story that we could not have known, but usually we knew. We just found it more comfortable in the moment to act as though we didn't. The grandmother lesson, whatever form it took in your family, in whatever kitchen, in whatever words, was almost never complicated. Watch. Wait, trust what you see over what you are told. Do not make yourself smaller to fit a space that was not built with you in mind. Those are not sophisticated ideas. They are very old ones. And the reason they keep being passed down generation to generation in kitchens and at kitchen tables is that they are true. And they require constant relearning because the pressure to ignore them is constant too. Your grandmother, whoever she was, whatever she said or did not say, would probably recognize it. Might even have something to say about it. Something short and precise and delivered without drama in the way of women who have seen enough to know that most things do not require a great deal of words. You already know better than this. My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch, where I believe the most honest conversations are the most useful ones. If this reached you today, share it with a woman who needs to hear it. And subscribe below because I am here every week and I would love to keep this conversation going with you. Thank you for sitting with me. I will see you next time.